Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, David. How
Hey,
are you?
good.
I'm very, very concerned about minimum wage, and I would like this opportunity to discuss some of the issues with you.
That's great, because I think a lot of people are concerned.
Great.
And it's good to get it out and talk about it.
Okay, perfect. There's been a lot of concerns that the restaurants have been very hard hit because of minimum wage going up. And it's not only minimum wage going up, and it's not, I think, that anybody wants people not to be paid well. It's just that it was such a large increase, and it came in a month that is the worst, not only for retail, but restaurants. I mean, January is a very hard month. And I'm getting a lot of people saying that they really think it was just a big election grab.
Yeah, so there's an ongoing discussion about why are programs put in place now, right ahead of the election. And my response has always been that that's when platforms should be rolled out. That's when plans should be rolled out. That's when changes are pushed because you're outlining it coming forward. And remember, over the last 4 years, the current government was committed to constraint. The current government was committed to getting the deficit down, because back in 2010, we had the worst recession in history, and all governments committed to big spending. And our deficit at that point was something like 20-some billion dollars,
Right.
Historic. And to get that down, it took year after year after year after year. And finally, in the last year of the last government's mandate, it was down to zero. And so what it meant, it was constraint. It meant you could not go forward with programs that people were asking for. And one of them was the ongoing discussion about minimum wage, because it's been stalled out for something like 8 years. It's been stalled out on an ongoing basis as our economy has done better than almost every other economy in the Western world. And yet, this one sector at the bottom of our economy was stalled out. They were not getting the increases. And as a business person, I know that you have to be competitive with the businesses around you. So I am not going to necessarily push up all the wages unless I have to. And this is just a straightforward process of business, because you have to compete. So if the environment and the rules allow me to do everything I can to compete, I will, because that's necessary.
But you're saying that you're not going to push them up, but they're also going to go up again in January of
Absolutely.
2019.
Yeah. Because $15 an hour is a number that's been worked out in many jurisdictions as a living wage, as a wage that's competitive, as a wage where it should have been, that if we had been keeping up year after year after year.
You don't
But it
think,
didn't.
though, that by pushing this through in January, they aren't going to give it enough time to see the repercussions to small businesses?
Well, you're already, 3 months in, and you're already getting jobs data, you're getting economic data, you're getting sales tax data. By the time the election comes around, and that's the question, is this just an election ploy, you'll have almost 4 to 5 to 6 months of data in. So the reality is that no matter when this was implemented, you would have gotten the same reaction from businesses, because it's imposing something on my cost structure that I don't like, because I'm already dealing with a lot of things. But the reality is if it's imposed on the entire sector right across, then it's fair, it's competitive, and people have to
The
react.
problem is, though, I think that everyone is just, to compensate for this, or they're just raising their prices.
That will be part of it, and
But-
keep in mind
then,
that,
it's not that people are losing their jobs, it's that hours are being cut
yeah,
to pay for it.
so-
So if you're working a 40-hour week and you're not on salary, you're going to be cut to a 35, 30-hour week,
So we saw that discussion on the Tim Hortons discussion.
right?
And here's the thing. If there's a lineup at the door of Tim Hortons, do you think they're going to cut hours?
Well,
Because-
I know they have been. I
Ah,
know that every
so-
restaurant in this town have been cutting hours, and they've had to raise prices. Because it's not just the difference between the wage at what it was to what it's gone to. It's that everybody that's sitting above that line, that are making between $15 and $20, you're also having to give them raises as well.
Some will, some won't, and that's called compression. And the reality is, me as a business person, I would have to address that with my people. But it's not automatic, and it's not something that automatically goes
No, it's
through.
not automatic, but employees are upset about it.
Well, there will be some time to get used to it. And remember the messaging that's getting out there. The messaging is from the conservative side is saying that it's not fair there, and yet those people still have to understand that the people that were making $10, $11, $12 an hour, that's not a living wage. Those are the people they were working with. It's not a living wage. But keep in mind one other thing, is that when this gets out there and the prices settle out, it's by some estimates for restaurants, wages are how much percentage of the cost?
20.9. Oh, of the cost, about 38%, and
So
that's.
38%. And how much of it
But
included?
that is cyclical, because they're not 38% in January. They're 52 or higher.
Okay, so when you factor in what the increase, the percentage of people that are on minimum wage, factor in the percentage of increase there, and the percentage of that of the cost of a average restaurant, what do the prices have to go up to compensate?
Quite a bit,
How much?
20.9%.
Well, that wouldn't actually work out 29%, because if you're
20.9%.
Yeah, so if you're
On average.
30% of the employees, or the cost.
Right.
And your cost, how many are minimum wage? Not all of your employees.
No, not at all.
And then a
But
percentage
you've also got to
going up.
pay the increased CPP on that.
Sure, which is how much? It's not that much.
Well, it depends on the
Yeah.
hourly wage per person.
The last time we saw a calculation, it came out something like 10%, 7%? What is the figure that has to be factored in? They have to adjust, that's true. And our inflation numbers will tell us how much that has an effect overall. And so far, 3 months in, the inflation is still in the 2% range.
But you're still, in a town like Brockville,
Yeah.
you're looking at a great majority of people that live on a fixed income. So now suddenly,
Great
you've got.
majority? There's a great number, it's not a majority.
Okay, great number then,
Yeah.
living on a fixed income.
Yeah.
And what you're doing to them is just raising the prices of things. It's not helping them any.
So when you refer to somebody on a fixed income, a senior?
Yes.
So how many people work minimum wage jobs out there? There's a
No, but they're the
portion
ones
that
that
are
are spending
seniors.
money. They're the ones that are going into stores, they're the ones that are going into restaurants.
Yeah.
And if they can't afford all the
Okay.
prices that are going up, that's certainly going to affect
So
people.
here's the thing, you're talking about the number or portion of people that are on fixed income or seniors. There is a portion in Brockville,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not a majority. Most people, there are something like 9,000 jobs in a city of 22,000 people here, of people that are even coming in. So the employment rate here is roughly 67%. That's the employment rate, the people. So if there's 20 to 30% of people that are fully retired, how many of those are on fully fixed income? Not all of them, because many of them are quite wealthy according to
Right.
the statistics.
How
So-
many of them are quite wealthy?
Well, actually, it's the greatest component of our economy ever retired that has had wealth right now.
But in Brockville.
Really? There are people moving here from Toronto, buying houses right now that are quite wealthy. There are people here that are retired teachers. There are people here that are retired firefighters, that are city employees, that have exceptional retirement pensions right now here. So to generalize like that is just not correct. There are people here that are on fixed income. My father, for example, is on a fixed income here. But at the same time, there are some of those very same people that are working these part-time jobs at minimum wage, that are benefiting specifically from
What do you
the
tell those
minimum
people
wage.
that have had their hours cut, and they're basically just
okay.
making the same amount that they were
Let's
before?
get back to that. There's two parts to that. If I should get paid a fair wage, I would really hope that I'm doing it if you're cutting back my hours, I'm working less but getting paid the same amount, and you think that's a problem?
No, but it's the uncertainty of it. Because, I mean, the restaurants have all stated, and so has retail, in Brockville, and I'm just talking about Brockville,
Yeah.
that their sales are down right now. And they think that the reason
So-
for it is because the prices have been increased.
So there's a couple of things. One, what you're talking about is feedback from restaurateurs that is a tough industry at the best of times.
Yep.
At the best of times, it's a high, there's a high turnover, it's a risky area, it's a tough industry. And the banks will tell you that historically.
Right.
And so any things that change, you will get that kind of feedback. What will be a full tell of how it's affected is 6 months out, 7 months out.
But that's
8
what I'm
months out.
saying. That's why did they wait until why did they wait until January? So we're beyond the election till all the stats come in and be
Well,
fully
no,
looked at.
so you're thinking that it should wait till the election, you're thinking it should wait, there's no
No,
perfect time.
I think that they should have not increased it so dramatically. But the other part of it is not just the minimum wage. The other part of it is that you're no longer allowed to get a sick note from an employee. So if an employee gets hurt on the job, goes to hospital, comes back, you can't, and so you can't ask this person for a sick note.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
So you-
Because now you're opening yourself up possibly to a WSIB claim.
So here's the reality of sick notes. How hard was it to get a sick note? Because if you would ask doctors, it was the biggest nuisance of their business. And doctors are already constrained for time now. And doctors were being asked to get sick notes from people that come in. If you really wanted to get a sick note and that was a requirement from your business, I go to the doctor and I say, I got a sore throat, I'm sick. And the doctor has to give you a sick note. You just used up one of the most important and valuable hours that we have in our system for nothing. And so that this person could go back and take a paper to your employer and say, there's a sick note, I'm off. It's not worth it, and the stats show us it's not worth it, and the numbers show us that that was a waste of time. So that area doesn't make sense. And when it comes to being an employer, if you got good management practices, and if you are managing your people well and you've got valuable people there, if you're going to fight over whether they have a sick note or not, there's bigger problems in your system. That's not the biggest problem. But let's go back to something you said earlier about minimum wage. So here, you mentioned about raising prices and about being an issue.
Right.
And about laying off people and cutting back.
I'm not saying laying people off.
Here's the thing. If you cut back hours, if your company says that my lowest paid people went up to $15 an hour, so I cut back their hours, and that was a good business decision, there's something wrong with your business model. Because if you were able to cut back the bodies that were working in your company, then you should have already done it, because you weren't as efficient as you should have been. I know that from all of our businesses, that the most competitive businesses out there look at those types of decisions all the time. And they should have made that decision previously. If you're only doing it now, then you're not looking at your business as competitively as you should be. And you are going to run into trouble. But if you could operate with fewer hours, you should have already done it. And if this is forcing you to do it, it's not the worst thing in the world.
I wouldn't say that it's a bad business model. What I think that what you're saying is, and especially in the service industry, is you're using this situation, you're sort of playing Russian roulette. You're cutting back hours in the hope that nobody's going to notice.
Wow.
And it puts more of a hardship on the employees that are there. They're just doing it with less
nobody
employees.
notices. So
In a service industry, if you have, say, 4 people on the floor serving and suddenly you go down to 2,
yeah, and you were still able to operate, you're still able to get your business, because if there were people...
well, I think you're putting a lot more pressure on the 2 people that are
But if
there
there
as
were
opposed to the
people
4.
there at the time that that person would have been there, and they're paying a reasonable rate for your service, you should have had people there, even if they're at $15 an hour. So these are things that will work their way out, and they should work their way out. Sometimes you need a kick. But the bottom line is, you're putting it in the perspective solely of that employer. You've got to put it in the perspective of the person that's getting $15 an hour. Go and ask those people, because the number one thing I get online is, this isn't fair because of this. This isn't fair because of timing. Nobody will ever be happy with the timing when something like this is put in. The other argument comes out, well, it's only a ruse so the government can get more taxes. No, it's not. You crunch the numbers, it's not. Well, nobody's really happy with it. Go and talk to the person that gets paid minimum wage. It's almost 30% of our workforce that gets affected by this. 30% of the workforce of the province of Ontario gets affected by this change. And it only moves somebody up, if they're at $15 an hour for 40 hours a week, to $30,000 a year. $30,000 a year. Do you know what the spread between most jobs and $30,000 a year is? It's phenomenal, the spread now. The spread is growing, and it has been growing, and as our economy has done well over the last 5, 7 years, 6 years, it's gotten bigger and bigger. We have people that move up by percentage, and if you're at the top end of the scale, you move up a lot faster. The spread gets bigger. The bottom end has no leverage and no negotiating power, and they haven't moved at all. As long as the law has said the minimum wage stays lower, they've stayed at the bottom with no movement. And it means that as inflation has gone up 2% a year, every year, over 10 years, that's 20%. But over the same 10 years, that minimum wage job earner has gone up only once or twice. They're getting paid the same they were getting paid 10 years ago. but their costs have all gone up 20%.
But costs are going up now after you
The
raise
same-
minimum wage.
But almost the same
But
rate
then
of
we're-
inflation.
But then we're gonna be at the same level because you've raised minimum wage and people are raising prices, so how much better off are you? If
Because-
it hadn't have come in more slowly.
Because the inflation rate this year will come in at approximately 2%. It came in at approximately 2% last year. It has come in at approximately 2% every year on average for 10 years.
But I don't think
So
you can
if
say
it-
that because you don't know how much prices have been raised until it all comes out in the wash.
Well, no, they get a monthly inflation rate comes out from the government of Canada, and it's been in the 2% range. And why that comes out is because they use that to monitor things like the interest rates.
Right.
And they didn't raise the interest rates the last round, which was just last week, particularly because their forecast is that the inflation is not going to be that high, and the markets are volatile. So the projections right now are inflation rate is going to be roughly 2% again this year, even with this increase, which means that that increase is either such a smaller portion of the entire price basket of goods, or it's going to be modified by companies that are adjusting. Companies, even restaurants, the ones that are proactively doing it are adjusting different prices. They're looking at the sellers that work best. They're looking at products that don't work best. They're adjusting their menus. They're adjusting their prices. They're adjusting what they market and then what they push out. So, and keep in mind, there are restaurants that are hugely busy. Again, I was at a Tim Hortons the other day, and even the Tim Hortons that are saying that they're getting hit by this, they're in their own internal squabbles, there's a lineup out the door. And guess what? If there's a lineup out the door, they'll hire people, because more people pushes more product, pushes more profit for them. So even though they were so much in the news on this, their sales are there. In fact, it was more of their notoriety in the news on this subject that's actually hurting their brand, which is odd. It's hurting their brand publicly.
Well, you're just saying there's a lineup out the door. It can't be hurting their brand that much.
No, we'll have to wait and see. But they used to be the good, cuddly Canadian company. And you know what? Their stance on the minimum wage showed that they weren't necessarily the good, cuddly Canadian company.
A friend of mine told me that she's in her early 40s. She went back to school.
Yeah.
She got a student loan and she went back to school for a year and a half. Got her degree, came out and got a job where I think she's being paid $19.50 an hour. She has this huge student loan.
Yeah.
She said all the prices have gone up and I have not seen a wage increase.
So, when she says all the prices have gone up.
Yes.
So when they say that the inflation rate is at 2%, that monitors a basket of goods, which includes cars, houses, interest, gasoline, food, the whole range.
Right.
And that says 2% on average right now, annually. So your impression is that that costs have gone up. Last year, food costs at grocery stores took a dip. Energy costs go up and down. Natural gas costs went down over the last couple of years. So yes, we all see when a price goes up. When we see the gas price at the corner store goes through the roof on a weekend, it pisses us all off because
Well,
it seems
gouging.
extraordinary and gouging. But you know what? When they do a monitoring of the actual cost of living index, it's a very scientific process. It's very involved, and it takes out the gut feeling of I don't like that, and it says what is it really doing. So it monitors it year after year after year. And if she's coming out with $19 an hour and she's concerned is that she hasn't had a wage increase, but you just identified some wage price pressure. You said that there'd be compression, that as you move the bottom line up, there would be pressure upwards. That would suggest that it would almost help that person. It would help some pressure on her employer if that happened. And I don't think at $19 an hour you're going to get that kind of compression. But a good employer is going to have a normal.
Well, she's employed by the government.
And she's not seeing any increases.
Not yet.
Well, that's
And
interesting.
and neither are the people that she's working with.
Okay, well, that's interesting because generally, most people out there
You
would
would think.
argue that government have
Absolutely.
done quite well.
Yes.
And if she's there, and depending on the contract, is she on contract
No,
or
she's a full-time employee.
So that would suggest she's probably got some benefits, probably has some pensions.
She works for the government.
Yeah, which is not, it's not automatic, depending on where you work, what you have, and on what
Right.
the terms are. But in that situation.
And this is the provincial government, not the federal government.
Yeah, so in that situation, you'd have to look at the terms of what one particular person has. But again, it would probably be a better contract than most people that are making minimum wage.
And
Those
another-
same people that we're trying to help. And remember, you just started off that sentence saying, she took a student loan, she went back to school. Do you realize that in conjunction with the minimum wage process, we just announced that an entire program to help tuition costs for anybody that's in a household under $95,000. That person wouldn't have had the same debt load going into the workforce. They would be starting in a more competitive position, and that's part of the process too, because our economy, if you want it to be fully competitive, you need to get more women into the workforce. You need to have daycare so they can get into the workforce. You need to have tuition support so they don't go into the workforce with a huge debt load, so that they're more likely to go and get an education and get into the workforce. The more they're in the workforce, the more competitive our economy is. The better producing it is. The better we can do programs, the better we can control debt. So there's steps here, you have to tie them all together. But the bottom line on minimum wage is you can't leave a huge portion of the people behind because legislative we have allowed it. And the other part that we've talked about even in local Brockville, local areas, do you realize that a dollar doesn't just sit there? When you have moved somebody from $20,000 a year to $30,000 a year, where does that money go? If you're concerned about local coffee shops and local restaurants, on the one hand, yes, the owners are immediately concerned about cost escalation. So they have to address that. But at the same time, you just had 22,000 people that have more money flowing through this system that will go back into coffee shops,
But I've already just
that will
told
go into
you
restaurants.
that a lot of people are having their hours cut. So they're basically making the same amount of money that they were, and you said that they have a better standard of life.
So
But
two
they don't have a
things.
better standard of life if they're making the same amount of money and costs have gone up.
So two things, that's anecdotal. You're saying a lot of people have been having their hours cut. That's not what you're gonna see it on, again, if there is business out there,
But
then a
you
restaurant
look
will
at
not
jobs
cut their
lost.
hours.
But business is being affected because the prices have gone up.
Okay, so jobs lost. You're
No,
suggesting they've been lost?
No, what I'm saying is the government moderates how many jobs get lost.
Yes.
Not opposed to how many,
Well, it doesn't
no,
moderate, but-
hours get cut.
So, on the jobs reports that have come out, and there's been 2 months, and by the second time, the net overall is that part-time jobs have dropped. They've been replaced by full-time jobs. So we have a net gain of jobs, and it's primarily full-time jobs. And if that was the net result of the entire package, because the entire package isn't just minimum wage, it's also about making sure that temp agencies are targeted. And temp agencies have to pay wages that are the same as people doing the same job in those companies. And there's other legislative aspects to it that do make it more fair for people that are getting picked up on the edges. And those things all combined, in this environment, in Brockville, right now, those same temp agencies are trying to hire people.
What about the temporary agencies that look after people with disabilities? They are reporting that people with disabilities are not getting the jobs that they used to get because people do not feel comfortable paying them $15 an hour.
And if you're familiar with how that's always been historically in the city, that's why we have the, what's the name of the organization? I forget the name of it, that's up by Nortel Building. But it's historically been the same issue.
EEC.
No, not the EC, it's the, who knows the building, it's Career Services.
Career services.
Yeah, so Career Services that's been their mandate, is to try and get people into companies. And that has always been an issue.
But it's an increased issue right now.
Well, it has been an issue. It was an issue at $10 an hour, it's an issue at $12 an hour, it's gonna be an issue at $15 an hour.
But it's an even bigger issue than it
Well,
was.
it
So
will be.
then what do you tell those people?
We have to do the same things that we've historically done. We try to set up programs that will try to get companies to match jobs that are appropriate and can be done and that they'll encourage. And we've historically had companies that do that. That's why Career Services is there. That's why it exists, to exactly deal with that issue that we've always had. And that's going to have to be dealt with the same way. So yes, that's a challenge. It always has been a challenge, and it's going to continue to be a challenge. But we've had great people that have hired people and tried to match jobs that way. We've done that at Henderson Printing historically. We've had jobs in our, that are temporary type jobs in our bindery areas where we brought in people from career services in the past, depending on what the need was.
How many people on minimum wage are at Henderson Printing?
At Henderson Printing now, because I've been out of it for
Right.
about 3 years, I would expect there's only some temporary roles when people come in to do what we used to call job lots. Or,
Right.
Yeah.
Like when you have a contract?
When you have a job, when you
Okay.
have a specific type
Okay.
of job that's come in. But generally, here's the thing about minimum wage. Very few of our factories here hire minimum wage because they've had wage pressure for years. You know, we've, Henderson Printing, when I was there, we had constant wage pressure. So most people were beyond minimum wage for a long time now. There are very few factories that have that type of wage structure still, because most are moving to automation already, because that's the only way you can compete. Because if you're hiring people with education and skills and background, there has been wage pressure for some time. So, you know, there are areas, sectors that have stayed with, and basically it's a supply and demand, minimum wage. Restaurants are one of them, service sectors,
Retail?
retail.
Right.
And those are areas that there's one of the real pushes of it. The retail sector, as an example, one, it's been consolidating like crazy already. So they've been getting huge, places like Walmart have been taking over the sector. Superstore, they've already been moving to automation, even with the existing minimum wages that were in place, because automation makes them more competitive. It's the same thing in factories. So you already are under incredible pressure for jobs. And that's been happening. To go to those automated kiosks. They were doing that already. They're going to keep doing it. It's not driven by the minimum wage that's there now. It was driven by the minimum wage that was there before. And the same way with factories. They're going to automation. The wages will be driven up, but the jobs are under pressure. And our retail sector across this area was already under severe pressure from things like online. Guess what? Minimum wage is not affecting online a lot, because the jobs are, and the business is already moving to online business out of Amazon, which is out of Timbuktu. That money's not coming back to us in Brockville very
No.
quickly. So those pressures are already in those industries, and those industries have to adapt. But we can't leave that one great big sector of people behind. They've got to be part of this economy, and they've got to have the ability to pay their bills, and they've got to have the ability to participate. And minimum wage push is part of that. And when we look at the studies, there's competing studies out there, but most of the bulk of the studies suggest that once it's in place, and once it works it through its system, and people adjust, it works. And I want to thank you for having this conversation, because obviously it's not easy, and you're representing an industry that's getting hammered, in some extent by cost push. And I understand that, and it's difficult. It's difficult to be in that industry regardless of this cost push. But at the end of the day, I think it's important, and that's why we're doing this. But I appreciate you having the conversation, and we didn't have to wrestle across the table. That was okay.
Well, thank you for taking the time to meet with me this morning.